Good evening and welcome to Behind Headlines, and in this programme tonight we shall be discussing a newly backed government report that tells us that Jew hatred has infected our middle classes, which could have profound implications not only for the safety of our Jewish community but British society on the whole. The Board of Deputies, the country's largest Jewish community organisation, has commissioned a report that's been produced by Lord Mann and former Defence Secretary Penny Mordaunt. And what they discovered in their report is that Jew hatred is rife in the NHS, education and in the arts, where Jews are often blamed for the actions of the Israeli government. In other fields, such as art, Jewish performers have faced threats of being cancelled because of their heritage and their ethnicity, as well as pressure from anti-Semitic organisations. The report concludes that there is almost nowhere where the British Jews can turn without encountering some form of anti-Semitism. The report on Jew hatred in the UK evokes a dark and disturbing echoes of the 1930s Nazi Germany. Will our nation learn the crucial lessons about the dangers of Jew hatred before it's too late? And in this programme, I'm joined by my good friend, Reverend Tim Gutman from Christian Action Against Anti-Semitism. Tim, pleasure to see you on the Behind Headlines. So thank you so much for co-hosting this programme with me.
Great to be here as always. Thanks for having me.
And Tim, just share your thoughts really on, because you and Hayley are doing a great work, really standing up for the British Jewish community. So much of these big rallies in defence of Israel and defence of the hostages, but also you are working as well to educate the church about the evils of Jew hatred. Just describe for us really the climate that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, this report isn't a shock for many of us with Jewish friends or work with the Jewish community. They've been saying this for a long time. And I think even the response by Lord Mann and Penny, that it said there was a stunned silence. I think people have not really understood the levels of anti-Semitism the Jewish people are facing. And you pointed out actually the Nazi Germany 1930s parallel and the middle classes. This is a frightening thing, something the Jewish people have been telling us for months, that you know, they're experiencing anti-Semitism with the NHS, for example, or in universities. We've seen it, you know, we've seen levels rise on a whole in this country, but I think for me as a Christian, for us as Christians, this is actually such a time not to be silent, not to be cowardly when our Jewish friends are suffering so much hatred.
Oh, absolutely. So just a reminder, there's been a new government-backed report. As of this recording, it will be published on Tuesday. But what it does show is that our middle classes have now become infected with Jew hatred. So on Saturday, the 12th of July, the Daily Telegraph published this article under the headline, Anti-Semitism Normalized in Middle Class Britain. The report was commissioned by the Board of Deputies, which is the UK's largest and most influential Jewish community organisation, and will be published on Tuesday, the 15th of July. We also see that this government-backed report was produced by Lord Mann, who's a Labour peer and a government advisor on anti-Semitism, and Penny Mordaunt, former Secretary of Defence, carried out for the Commission on Anti-Semitism. They discovered that Jew hatred was rife in the NHS, education and in the arts. And the report reveals that British Jews are often blamed for the actions of the Israeli government, and this is particularly evident in the NHS, where the Jewish doctors have reported a significant increase in abuse since October the 7th. It's extraordinary, isn't it? And there's so many different cases, I think, where we're seeing in the medical profession where Jewish people are being maligned. And I remember one very disturbing case of an Orthodox Jewish boy, I think he was about 9. He's got a rare infectious disease, which means he needs his blood drained and new blood added in every month. And because he looks visibly Jewish, because he's wearing the kind of religious Jewish attire, the Muslim nurses that were tending to him in Manchester, he had to sleep on the floor and wasn't given a bed. and was given horrendous treatment. Other cases as well, with Jewish colleagues seeing doctors and nurses wearing like the Palestinian flag as well, highly kind of politicized and contentious in certainly in the kind of hospitals and everything else, which is making Jewish patients, which is making Jewish doctors and Jewish nurses feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, from the very start, this was the claim: we're not anti-Semitic, we're anti-Zionist. And yet that whole movement, the symbols, the Palestinian flag, which the Jewish people have to face so often in their days and their work life, the kafir, you know, they're confronted with this. Those symbols stand for the end of the only Jewish nation. A report suggested that 85% of British Jews are Zionist, you know, as indeed we are. And so what they're saying is, we're not anti-Semitic, we just hate 85% of you. The climate is this. The climate is, unless a Jewish person comes out and says Israel should be destroyed, they absolutely face hatred and rejection. We've had doctors chanting Intifada in the streets, doctors active on social media. Jewish people have to come to some of these doctors knowing that they are fiercely anti-Israel and anti-Semitic.
No, it's absolutely frightening. Also, the report also, additionally, that Jewish members of the British Medical Association have expressed a feeling unsafe due to emotions related to the Middle East conflict that they perceive as anti-Semitic. They say in other fields such as arts, Jewish performers have faced the threat of being cancelled because of their heritage or ethnicity, as well as pressure from anti-Semitic organisations. The report concludes there almost is nowhere that British Jews can turn without encountering some form of anti-Semitism. And the new report also indicates a very dark, disturbing trend towards Nazi Germany, and there's that parallel in history. And I think it's also tragic as well. So whether it's in education with the unions, or whether it's the medical professions and their unions as well, it seems to be that the hard left and the kind of Islamists are using their professional positions to push this pro-Gaza agenda, when really, frankly, Gaza has nothing to do with our education, with our medical profession, even in the arts, but yet is being politicised and used as a weapon. And of course, our media is fueling this as well with inaccurate and dangerous reporting.
And how much is the media fueling it? You know, the BBC have been caught out so much recently. This red-green alliance, if you like, this far left and Islamist alliance. It's shocking, actually. You know, just think about this. In 21st century Britain, there were politicians standing on the Gaza ticket. You know, nothing to do with this country. And Jewish people are feeling, you know, if your family's Jewish and you feel like you cannot wear your symbols of your faith, you feel like you have to hide just walking down the street, you know, thinking about maybe I don't have a future here. This is frightening for us. As Christians, I truly believe this is such a key time. You know, are we going to lose our nation to this madness, to this hatred, to this, you know, anti-Semitism?
No, absolutely. So let's go to a scripture, and I think it's very important that we look at today Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 3 and 6 that follows. The Lord has appeared of old to me, saying, yes, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness I draw you, and again I will build you, and you shall be rebuilt. O Virgin of Israel, you shall again be adorned with your tambourines, and shall go forth in the dances of those who rejoice. You shall yet plant vines on the mountains of Samaria. The planters shall plant and eat them as ordinary food. For there shall be a day when the watchman will cry out on Mount Ephraim, arise, and let us go up to Zion, to the Lord our God. As a pastor, do you want to unpack that? Because I find that is a reassuring scripture for the Jewish people and for the nation of Israel, because it talks about God's loving kindness towards Israel. It talks about the restoration of the modern state of Israel. And the extraordinary thing, it talks about how the vines will grow forth in Samaria again. Now that's only happened since the 1980s. So ever since Israel won the Six-Day War in June 1967, and the Jewish communities have then decided to move into the biblical heartland of Israel, they bought these wonderful vines and vine groves, and today you can drink wine from Samaria in fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
It's incredible. There's so much prophecy being fulfilled in the days we're living in. You know, I've had conversations with people that would side more to the replacement theology side of things, and I don't understand how, you know, this tiny nation, you know, on headline news every day, God clearly protecting, you know, and doing amazing miracles in such a short time, 77 years young, 3,000 years old. But there are certain prophecies in the Bible, and this is how I unpack it when I'm preaching about Israel. There are certain promises that only apply today. So he's promised to bring them back from the north, east, south and west. This has happened in 1948, happening before that, but 1948 was huge. And then some promises after that means, for example, Amos 9:13, they will never be uprooted. Promises that God will protect his people. He's their shield and great reward. He promised Abraham the land forever. He promised what we've just read here, the vine. There are so many promises being fulfilled. Look at how God actually protects his people. 1967, all of these wars and the miracles, and this since October the 7th. Look how God has, been with his people. Look how God has responded. Hamas, Hezbollah, the IRGC, Syria, this tiny nation, Israel. It's miraculous.
And taken out Iran's nuclear facilities, and now the latest report coming out of the regime in Iran is that they're accusing Israel of using the occult and dark arts and recognizing there was a supernatural force behind Israel. I think it's more them using the occult. Clearly hasn't worked, and they really come against the God of Israel.
Well, I saw a post, and it was this thing about Iran accusing them of using supernatural, having supernatural power, and a lot of Jewish people are like, absolutely, Hashem, God is with his people. It's quite clear.
Exactly. So let's be on the right side of history. So on my personal reflections, I find this new report that has been an extract has been published in the Daily Telegraph, and of course we see that Lord Mann and Penny Mordaunt have also written an op-ed piece in the Daily Telegraph with their thoughts on this shocking finding of this commission report that was commissioned by the Board of Deputies to discover the extent of Jew hatred within the kind of middle classes and within the kind of professional remit of Britain, particularly looking at the arts and education, the NHS. And what I find is so alarming with this one is that it's coming from the middle classes, and they should know better. I mean, here we have most of those who are in middle class professions will be university educated, highly intelligent, being able to kind of think for themselves, and they have now become infected with Jew hatred. And of course, once the middle classes become infected with Jew hatred, that is one slippery slope towards authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And we know that this represents pure evil, because Jew hatred is satanic. But sadly, this is not happening in Germany in the 1930s with the rise of Hitler. This is happening in Britain today in 2025.
Yeah, and Hitler and the Nazis, they couldn't do what they did without the middle classes, without the majority, of the middle classes supporting them, not opposing them. It's a frightening. There's a real agenda. There's a real agenda with many universities, with the media. There's a hatred of so-called colonialism and, Christian values and Judeo-Christian values. The Jewish people are at the forefront of something here, and this is often the case. And, what we often say is it won't end with anti-Semitism. It won't end if Israel's ever taken off the map. Believe you me, they'll come for all of us. And this report of anti-Semitism, it tells you where we're at in our universities, in our media, education and arts, and it's frightening.
Absolutely. And of course, with Hitler and the SS and the Nazis, if it wasn't for the support of the middle classes, they wouldn't have been able to come to power. They wouldn't have then been able to implement the Nuremberg laws, and then they wouldn't be able to implement the final solution, which was their attempt to destroy the Jewish people and wipe out those ancient Jewish communities across Europe, in which over 6 million were murdered at the hands of the Nazis on industrial scale in the Nazi death camps and gas chambers. So we know this is why the middle classes need to stand up, because they are the backbone of each country and each nation. And this is why it's imperative that this infection of Jew hatred is dealt with quickly before it's too late.
Absolutely. I mean, this is such a key time in our nation's history. I really believe that, the way the nation's heading and where we're at right now, the climate of anti-Semitism. I think it's key for the middle classes. If you're silent now, if you're asleep now, we will lose our country to something. It will get worse, if we don't wake up now. And, the media is a huge part of this. We've said that as well.
Absolutely. And how many times have we heard our mainstream media, either on BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, even possibly sometimes, I haven't heard it on Sky, but essentially what we're hearing is news reporters presenting news as if it's fact. For example, this constant accusation that Israel's committing war crimes and acts of genocide in Gaza. And of course, what Israel's doing is protecting their citizens from the horrors of Hamas, who committed the biggest act of genocide against the Jewish people since the Holocaust over 80 years ago in southern Israel. And there's no context of that. And there's a constant accusation that Israel is committing war crimes and genocide and killing babies and children. So of course this fuels this hatred, because people today are in this kind of 24/7 news cycle with social media, with news apps, and news are bombarded with information all the time, that people don't have the time to find facts for themselves. So these journalists and news producers are putting their very anti-Israel agenda right to the fore and getting away with it. And of course, is it any wonder then that we're seeing with these lies and manipulation of our media that people's hearts are being poisoned with this Jew hatred, that they're turning against Israel? And of course, then they would associate their Jewish colleagues with those of the IDF and say, well, look, those are members of the Israeli Defense Force, they are Jewish, therefore they must be exactly like the Jews that I work with in my community. They're the ones committing genocide, so this is what these people would do if they had a chance to commit genocide. This is what's so perverse and so disgusting about it.
And they're sharing blood libels and conspiracy theories. They're sharing Hamas figures as fact and Hamas statements as fact. I mean, let's take the BBC. This is a huge one. When we pay for the BBC, right? It's a government. It's the public broadcasting company. The BBC, from the get-go, refused to call Hamas terrorists. They were calling them militants. The BBC have been caught out doing documentaries using Hamas children. The BBC have even recently there was this satanic band chanting death to the IDF. And the BBC were showing this live. There's so much, and they're obsessed. Every day there's something about Israel. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't know that 5.5 million have been killed in Congo, or the hundreds of thousands in Syria and Yemen, the famine. And people, there's an obsession with Israel. This is anti-Semitism. There are hostages still there.
And what about the news as well that 40,000 Afghans have been expelled from the Islamic Republic of Iran in the biggest deportation of people this century, and yet there's silence. And it's not even covered.
Where's the media reporting? Where is the people on the streets for any of these things we've mentioned? There isn't. This obsession is so clear.
And of course, this Jew hatred is also being, being influenced by the pro-Palestinian demonstrators. As you know very, very well, a lot of these big solidarity meetings in support of Gaza that we're seeing constantly in London, these hate marches that we're seeing. Also, we're seeing that the unions are really pushing this anti-Israel agenda through the unions. And it's getting very, very dangerous, and it's also infecting our country. So is it any wonder that our Jewish community feel like there is no relief from this hatred in Britain today?
They're bombarded every day in their life, the Jewish community, what they tell us. They're bombarded with, not just the marches, they're bombarded with the media, they're bombarded with kafirs and Palestinian flags, they're bombarded with statements and stickers everywhere. They're bombarded with just so much hostility and so much hate. And there's so many individual stories of Jewish people being attacked, physically attacked, verbally attacked for no other reason than they're Jewish. They're being attacked because of, somebody decides they hate Israel for whatever reason. They're blaming the Jewish community. This is happening up and down this country. It's happening in frightening levels, record-breaking, horrific levels.
So let's have a look now at an excellent report that's been published by the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem called Yad Vashem, and this is called What is Hatred? And this is courtesy of our friends at Yad Vashem.
What is hatred? Hatred, like love, is an emotion. The essence of this emotion is the desire to harm or destroy the target of hatred, or for that target of hatred to disappear. Therefore, to hate a person or group, their presence is necessary. And while in the case of antipathy, there is a simple feeling of dislike, aversion, or disgust towards a person, hatred is characterized by an active approach to the target of hatred, with the intent to bring about its partial or complete destruction. There are different forms of hatred. We can talk about hatred of oneself, interpersonal, partnership, or marital hatred, intra or interfamilial hatred, intra and intergroup hatred, as well as nationalist, racial, or religious hatred. Many theorists believe that hatred develops towards people who are in some way similar or compatible with us. What does not touch our personal domain can hardly ever become the target of our destructive feelings. Hatred requires stereotypes of the hated group or person in order to function, and can be evoked consciously, especially in non-liberal societies, by means of propaganda or incitement. Combined with the means of power, hatred can often even lead to the complete psychological, social, or physical destruction of other individuals, groups, nations, or religious communities. Because innate and unchanging traits are attributed to the target of hatred, those hating do not see room for constructive solutions, but only for radical action.
Thank you to our friends at Yad Vashem for what was an excellent video on hatred. And actually, as Christians, we are called to have no hatred, just to have love in our hearts. Love for everyone, actually, you know, the love of God. So hatred is such a huge part of this anti-Semitism. It takes root in someone's heart. Let's unpack this report now that was commissioned by the Board of Deputies. On January the 17th, 2025, the Board of Deputies announced their Commission on Anti-Semitism call for written evidence. You can see this on their website, which is bod.org.uk. The Board of Deputies of British Jews Commission on Anti-Semitism has been launched a year following the October the 7th terrorist attack in Israel and subsequent war in the Middle East, which has seen a dramatic rise of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom. The Commission on Anti-Semitism is being co-chaired by Lord John Mann and former Secretary of Defence Penny Mordaunt. The Commission is investigating the rise of anti-Semitism in the UK and will make far-reaching recommendations which will also encompass a comprehensive review of hate crime, legislation and policing and prosecution, including public order and safety. It will encompass a sector-by-sector review of the failings in civil society since the 7th of October 2023, whether in the media, social media, schools, academia, workplaces, trade unions, sport and culture.
Which is very, very important. And it's good that the Board of Deputies are doing this. No doubt that they are under immense pressure from their own Jewish community with this rise of Jew hatred. And I've heard a lot from my Jewish friends that the most topical discussion for a Friday night dinner is, are they making Aliyah, making plans to make Aliyah, whether to Israel or to leave the UK because of the rise of Jew hatred that we're seeing. And our government really not doing enough to stamp down on this hatred, but actually fueling it with their anti-Israel foreign policy, which they see as being very dangerous, and we see in that being dangerous as well. But also the likes of Lord John Mann, who's in the House of Lords. He was a former Labour MP. He, in his past, has really spoken up on behalf of Jew hatred and on the Jewish community. And of course now Penny Mordaunt's got involved as well, and she's a former Conservative Secretary of Defence, which gives kind of credos to this report. It means then that the government has to take this seriously, and the NHS has to take this seriously because it's a government agency, and also education authorities need to take this seriously as well, because effectively it means that if there is government money and funding into these sectors of work, then they need to really stamp out on Jew hatred. So there are huge implications in this one. Also says here as well that the Board of Deputies did invite people to make written submissions to showcase evidence of anti-Semitism in British society, and or provide robust recommendations for how anti-Semitism can be tackled by government, prosecutors, social media companies, educational institutions, trade unions and other stakeholders. They also said that we welcome submissions from the organisation and individuals that have been affected or have dealt with anti-Semitism in the UK since October the 7th, 2023, and submissions may also include examples of implementation of good practice, which now brings us on to the publication of the report. And the Daily Telegraph had a kind of inside view, as this was given, and this is an exclusive to the Daily Telegraph before the actual report is published as of the recording of this programme. So on Saturday the 12th of July, the Daily Telegraph published an article under the headline "Anti-Semitism Normalized in Middle Class Britain." It says the government-backed report says that Jewish people suffering increased prejudice across society. So if we unpack some of the findings, so they are that anti-Semitism has been normalised in middle class Britain, and government-backed reports has found this. So of course we know that so many Jewish people are professionals, they work in kind of the professional arena, and also they have professional bodies, and they're seeing that this is being radicalised with an anti-Israel agenda in so many of our professions, whether it's the kind of medical schools or the kind of medical unions, or whether it's part of the trade unions, or whether it's journalism. All these kind of professions now are really predominantly taking a very anti-Israel viewpoint, which is making their Jewish members feel extremely uncomfortable.
Absolutely, and whether you whether you work, for example, in the NHS, or whether you go to university. I mean, the findings, or what I've heard from Jewish students, it's terrible in universities. It's frightening. This is something we've been aware of, like yourself, those with Jewish friends, but it's so important. This report, I think you touched on this, but we've got two politicians, commissioning this report on both sides of the political spectrum, and this does confirm what we already know. It does kind of like lay out what the climate is right now, and I think hopefully there will be a response. Hopefully there'll be some kind of changes, some kind of recognition of this.
No, absolutely. So we also see that the review has warned that Jewish people in the UK were suffering increasing prejudice in our professions, cultural life and public services, and felt that they are being tolerated rather than respected. The report, commissioned by the Board of Deputies, which is the country's largest Jewish community organisation, which is the umbrella organisation that acts on behalf of the British Jewish community and also the British government, found that Jew hatred is persuasive in the NHS, universities and in the arts. We see that there is inconsistency in policing of hate crimes against Jews, including the pro-Palestinian protests and marches were highlighted. And of course you've experienced these, haven't you? I mean, what they are also saying in this report is that they are disgusted with the fact that the police are pursuing a two-tier policing. So the Islamists and the pro-Palestinian mobs are able to shout calls for genocide, that Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, which is an incitement to genocide. They can spill their hatred on the streets, and yet there's no recompense from that. Even, for example, other mosques and others that celebrate and support Hamas and Hamas's activities on October the 7th have been let off with a light fine, or it's just been pushed into touch. Share with us what you've experienced being on the streets of London with these pro-Israel demos, or these demos in support of the hostages, and the way that the police have now effectively implemented a no-go zone for Jewish people in central London, particularly on a Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. We were hearing this very soon after October the 7th. London became a no-go zone. In fact, there was protests, celebrations we call them, on October the 8th straight away. It was important for us as Christians to be seen at the counter-protests, as we call them, and we would just hold signs saying Christians stand with and love with the Jewish community. And what I've witnessed firsthand is I've witnessed week after week, same anti-Semitic signs: the Jews control the government and the media, the same conspiracies, blood libels, the same chanting for Intifada, the same chants of from the river to the sea. And yet I've also seen, I saw with my own eyes, somebody hold up a sign making a caricature with someone from Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, and that Jewish person was arrested straight away. So there's a feeling of appeasing the mob, appeasing, the Islamists and the Marxists, if you like, and coming down hard on the Jewish protesters, on ourselves as well, because it's almost like we're an easy target. We saw this, we were unhappy as well with some of the statements by the police, by the Mayor of London, allowing this to happen. And this two-tier thing is very real. I've seen it week after week after week, the same signs, the same chanting, and yet people on our side of the fence, if you like, being arrested for the smallest things.
And I just want to pick up something you said. I mean, this is the stupidity of the situation that we face, or the complete foolishness. To believe that the Jews control our media, and to believe that the Jews control our government, when we see really that this government is turning so much against Israel in terms of foreign policy, and also kind of in the media, which is now fueling this hatred through their false media reporting of Israel's conflict against Hamas in Gaza, that is fueling this hatred. If the Jews controlled the media, and if they controlled the politicians, then surely we'd have very, very pro-Israel policies, and our media wouldn't say anything derogatory against Israel or the IDF or anyone else. But that is clearly not the case. So it proves their point, that the lies and the accusations they're making.
You know what? I say this all the time. If the Jews control the media, they're doing a terrible job. It's like if Israel's committing genocide, it's doing a terrible job. I mean, the population grew in Gaza. It's illogical. Nothing about anti-Semitism is logical. It's hatred. It's, as put my minister hat on, it's satanic. So it makes no sense. The accusations. The Jewish people, I think 16 million in the world, and yet, according to so many people, responsible for everything from the weather to, controlling the media and controlling Hollywood. The media has been hugely anti-Israel by and large.
Absolutely. So the other things in this report have come out is that the co-authors said the British Jews often were held responsible for the actions of the Israeli government, which are frequently the subject of pro-Palestinian protests. The report also raised concerns that the police have struggled to effectively tackle anti-Jew hate, arguing that improvements can be made to ensure that there is a consistent standard and understanding of anti-Semitism across all police forces throughout the country, and saying that how the war in Gaza following October the 7th attacks triggered mass protests that were branded hate marches by Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary at the time, back in October 2023. And of course, she called out the Met Commissioner for not doing enough to stop these hate marches, in which it ultimately cost her job as the Home Secretary. So we see really that our government is really not doing anything, plus also accusations of two-tier approaching, allowing what critics have been described as intimidating pro-Palestinian protests outside Jewish places of worship. And this is horrific. And there was a report in the Sunday Times only a few months ago that Jewish people are afraid to go into central London on a Saturday because of these massive pro-Palestinian marches. And I've seen them, I've been caught up with them, I know you have, that they are absolutely horrific.
The atmosphere is not, it's horrifying, but it's also, it's demonic spiritually. I'm, talking as a pastor here. It's demonic. We're talking hate, a climate of such hatred and evil. Actually, for a Jewish person, it must be, and it is. It's tremendously frightening to see this. It feels like, and I've said this before, it feels like, those Nazi marches or those Nazi gatherings, when...
What is that infusion of Nazism with Islamism? which is producing this deadly cocktail of hatred that we're seeing today. And just give you a bit of a taste, Palestinian Action Group were taken to court recently at the High Court, and these are their supporters who are in support of Palestinian action. I constantly see Palestinian flags. We see there with banners, free the felons, and these climate of hatred and hassle and confrontation against the police. And you contrast that between one of your rallies that you've organised, which are incredibly peaceful, considerate to the police, and yet here we see aggro hatred against the Jewish people, and of course the actions taken by Palestinian Action have been absolutely horrific, causing £30 million worth of damage to RAF aircraft at an army base, and of course the kafirs, the headscarf and the mask hiding their identity and stuff as well. Share with us what it's like to be in the midst of this, because you have to.
Yeah, I mean, you can see what it's like. It's horrifying, this constant need from those pro-Palestinian supporters. Everything is directed at the police or directed at the Jewish people. There's so much hate, and if you were to come to one of our gatherings or to a Jewish gathering, it's not just peaceful. They thank the police. They give the police a round of applause. It's peaceful. There's songs. There's prayers. We pray, and then you find yourself facing a hate mob. That's all I can describe it. Here's a story which will shock you, and I think I've said this before in one of our previous programs. We had an event in Glasgow, and we took a Holocaust survivor, an amazing man, and he travels around the school sharing his story. And he was sharing how it feels like in London, like the 1930s in Nazi Germany. This is a Holocaust survivor. As he was saying that, a group of people went by, or somebody went by and shouted genocidal beep at the Holocaust survivor. And that sums up exactly what's going on. It's horrifying.
And it is very sad for those remaining Holocaust survivors, because again, they're seeing this level of Jew hatred rise again, and they have experienced the consequences of where Jew hatred leads, and it leads to the death and destruction of the Jewish people, as it did during the Second World War with the Nazi regime. Yeah. But it also led almost to the destruction of Western civilization. So over 6 million Jewish people were murdered by the Nazis, and as a result, nearly 80 million people died in the Second World War. So this is what happens when we don't stand up to evil. So let's have a look now at this excellent report put together by Dale Hurd at CBN earlier this year, looking into the impact that Jew hatred is having on the Jewish community, and is there a future for British Jewry?
This is the United Kingdom that British Jews experience today.
Zionists, they are filthy animals.
Like obedient sheep, you obey Israel.
The whole condemning Hamas, I'm not going to condemn them, and Israel doesn't exist.
Most British Jews now no longer believe they have a future here. Recent polling has also found that most Jews hide their Jewishness in public and do not feel welcome in the United Kingdom. Gideon Falter is chief executive of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which commissioned the poll and has been documenting the rising Jew hatred.
A lot of people have talked about whether they have a future in this country. Do I think the Jewish community in the UK is going to evaporate? No. But I do think there is a sizable conversation now happening within the community of people saying, okay, is this the place that we've got a future?
There were nearly 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents reported in the first half of 2024, the highest number ever recorded for a 6-month period. 9 out of 10 British Jews say the government is not doing enough to stop the violence and discrimination.
I know some who have left. I know some who are actively, seriously looking at leaving.
Jewish investigative journalist David Collier tells us he constantly feels the anti-Jewish hate.
I get death threats every single day, but I'm also being contacted by Jews either who are having trouble at work, at home, students.
What brings you both out here today?
Well, just the amount of anti-Semitism we've had in Oxford for the past year has been really awful. We've had swastikas, we've had Jews being accused of weaponising anti-Semitism.
We've been told we're not welcome at the university.
Yeah, and it just...
down the streets.
It's been escalating, and this is the big message, it's about the escalation, you know, it's getting gradually worse.
This in a nation where the adopted national song is Jerusalem. In the song Jerusalem, the British sing, "We will not cease till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land." But this Judeo-Christian connection that goes back centuries has begun to fray. Surveys show British Jews consider Islamists to be the most serious threat. And in a close second is the far left. Falter adds the nation's young people are being indoctrinated against Jews.
They are becoming radicalized on the internet. They are imbibing bigotries that their parents themselves don't have. And then they're teaching this from one kid to another kid. We've got a generation which is extremely hateful. And not just hateful, they're extremists.
Some non-Jews have seen the danger and are publicly supporting Britain's Jews. Mark Burbeck began the group Our Fight after he witnessed the lack of public support for Jews in Israel following the October 7th massacre.
Shock at the lack of empathy that people had for the Israeli people, the Jewish people, after October the 7th. In that period, a few of us were going to these vigils that were being organised by the Israeli community, and we sort of thought, we need to do something.
Another group supporting Britain's Jews is Christian Action Against Anti-Semitism, led by pastors Tim and Haley Gutman.
Our heart was to do something publicly that showed the Jewish people we stand with them, we love them, we're with them in solidarity. They're not alone, especially amidst this rising anti-Semitism.
David Collier is afraid demographics have already decided the future course of Britain's Jews. The most popular name for baby boys in Britain today is Mohammed.
It's a completely different country. The entire dynamic has changed, the entire atmosphere has changed, both towards Israel and in extension towards the Jewish community. It's completely different. It's a different country with a different demographic, a different outlook. Everything about it is different. You're talking to these Jewish people, and you know that things are only going to get worse for them, not better. There's no way back for the United Kingdom from this point. As far as I see it, no way back.
Falter has decided to stand and fight for the future, with the hope that more non-Jews will join him.
I think a lot of people don't realize how anti-Semitism relates to them, but they don't see it as something that's going to actually hit home, hit them. Whatever happens with anti-Semitism in this country, if extremism continues to surge in the way that it is now, this country's in for dark days, and so is the West.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, London.
Again, huge thanks to CBN and our friend Dale Hurd for another excellent, actually powerful report about the state of anti-Semitism in the UK, which is painful for us who love the Jewish community and have prayed for Israel, and considering our history of Christian Zionism and the friendship to the Jewish people and where we are now. It's a real wake-up call. Let's turn our attention now back to the report, specifically to the NHS. Researchers found many Jewish employees within NHS organisations felt that issues in their workplaces were not being addressed and had been swept under the carpet. From evidence that we heard, we can identify that there is a specific unaddressed issue of anti-Semitism within the NHS, they wrote. Jewish doctors in the NHS have reported a surge in anti-Semitic abuse from colleagues since October the 7th, according to the General Medical Council, the GMC, the independent body which regulates the UK Medical Register. Several NHS staff have been reported for anti-Semitic activities, from workplace abuse to social media posts celebrating October the 7th. And in 2024, the NHS suspended a family GP who described the attacks as a welcome punch on the nose, but later reinstated him, citing insufficient evidence that he was unfit to practice.
And we also see that, according to this report as well, that last month Jewish members of the British Medical Association, the Doctors' Union, told the Telegraph that they did not feel safe because of motions relating to the Middle East conflict, which they deemed as anti-Semitic. In response to this, the NHS have had a spokesman who said it is completely unacceptable for anyone to experience racism, discrimination or prejudice in the health service, whether staff or patients, and the NHS takes any instances of anti-Semitism or discrimination extremely seriously. The NHS provides care and treatment for everyone regardless of race, faith or background, and all NHS healthcare providers should have policies in place to address issues like this in the workplace. I mean, it's very alarming. The fact is, there are a lot of Jewish doctors and a lot of Jewish nurses and occupational health nurses and others who work in this field. And then to find out that they face anti-Semitism and abuse from fellow doctors is nothing less than extraordinary. And of course, the weaponization of the British Medical Association in its hatred towards Israel through a lot of these anti-Israel motions, all about Gaza, when really it's there to protect doctors working in our hospitals. It's not there as a foreign policy platform for people to vent their hatred against another people group.
We're seeing this so much with so many things like trade unions or education and these conferences where they're condemning Israel. It's like, what has that got to do with your responsibility as medical professionals? The atmosphere is this: if you're Jewish, this is a fact. If you have got a hospital appointment, a doctor's appointment, you're wondering, does this person hate me because I'm Jewish? Will this person take care of me? Will this person give me the best care, or even harm me, like we heard in Australia, or like we heard in this country when a Jewish boy was made to lie on the floor? This is beyond frightening, actually, that doctors who are employed to be doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals have this obsession with Gaza. It's illogical.
No, it's frightening. So let's move on to this report and its impact on education. So they said the education sector was also criticised in the report, allowing the spread of anti-Semitism on university campuses and in primary school classes. So writing in the Telegraph, the co-authors noted one campus where staff members who were Jewish students trust with their health records were shouted for Intifada, an Arabic word that can be used to describe violent Palestinian uprisings against Israel. And of course, when you chant Intifada, effectively you're calling for terrorism and violence against Israel and the Jewish people. We see that at Leeds University, for example, a chaplain received death threats and rape threats against his wife after returning from his Israel Defense Force reserve duties in Israel. In another instance, a Jewish student society was targeted by a bomb hoax. And we know, and I've done programs on the Middle East report about how difficult it is on university campuses with this Jew hatred that is spiraling out of control. We also see the report also found evidence that some faith primary schools inadvertently use anti-Semitic tropes when teaching subjects like religious education. Other professions, the co-author found examples of professional bodies and trade unionists passing motions about Israel that has alienated Jewish members. And again, I think what we're seeing in play, aren't we, and you mentioned this earlier in the programme, is this coalition of the unholy. The Islamists who are representing the green colour, and of course the Reds who are representing the hard left, the Marxists, the Socialists, the Communists, who are actually forging an alliance together because they hate the West so much. And of course what unites them is their hatred of Israel and the Jewish people.
Absolutely, and Christians wake up. They hate our Christian values. They hate Judeo-Christian morals. They the hard left Marxists, they want chaos, and the Islamists have a clear agenda. Picture these. Imagine if you're a Jewish student, please, for a second, and you're going to university and you have to get through one of these encampments with their signs, with their kafirs and their flags, with their intifada chanting, and from the river to the sea. It's horrific.
And of course, this is backed up as well by many university lecturers as well. So if you're a Jewish lecturer at one of these universities and they find that your fellow lecturers are supporting this is frightening. The report also gives a practical example. Something horrific happened in April. So a Jewish teacher was loudly heckled for challenging an anti-Israel motion at the National Education Union annual conference in Bournemouth. Researchers also received evidence about where an individual believes their professional body is actively discriminating against them, but they require membership in order to be able to work. So we're finding that this is very difficult, and in some cases we're seeing that these unions who as a professional body needs their authorization to actually work, are finding that these are being unaccepted because they might be standing up for Israel, or because they are Israeli, or because they're Jewish. Is frightening. Let's unpack what's happening in the arts. So they said in the arts, the report found a substantial evidence of more hidden barriers being put in front of Jewish involvement, and examples of cultural institutions cancelling artists because of their heritage, ethnicity, or pressure from anti-Semitic organisations. So Lord Mann and Dame Penny said that they were moved by a young Jewish performer who was told that following October the 7th, venues and promoters who the artist had worked for years no longer wanted to engage with her. The report found that almost nowhere that the British Jews could turn where anti-Semitism does not present itself in some form, as well as failure to effectively respond by institutions across the United Kingdom. So, I mean, you've got artists, whether they're music professionals, whether it's actors or actresses, others, plays are being cancelled because they're Jewish. And because these art councils are afraid that this might cause offence to the Islamists and to the hard left. So the easy thing to do is then cancel them. It's frightening.
Yeah, I knew a Jewish woman. She was an artist, and she'd have her paintings displayed in a gallery, and they would do it every year, but they never asked her back. I mean, if you're Jewish, so many Jewish people have told us they can't go to events like Glastonbury or music events because the atmosphere, as we know, is hateful.
When something like Glastonbury should be standing in solidarity with the partygoers at the Nova Music Festival, because that could easily happen to Glastonbury or another music festival in the UK, because that those poor defenceless partygoers had to face the evil of those Hamas terrorists and the rapings, the mutilations, the violence and the terror. Absolutely unbelievable. That should horrify the organisers of Glastonbury, and of course that's another where we're seeing they're not allowing Israeli or Jewish artists to perform. And we're also seeing, for example, up in Camden, that Amy Winehouse's statue has been defaced. And of course, she's a leading Jewish singer and songwriter, died unfortunately recently, tragically. And yet she never spoke up for Israel, and yet she's being attacked.
Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, this is across the board, where education, arts, the media, social media, just turning our attention to the report's recommendations now. Now, Lord Mann and Penny Mordaunt both said they were stunned into silence, but this is their recommendations. They concluded that anti-Semitism was not understood as a form of racism in Britain, and recommended that Judaism be nationally recognised as an ethnicity as well as a religion, so that anti-Jewish prejudice could be tackled more effectively. Other recommendations, including the drafting of a national policy on dealing with anti-Semitism, consistently to be followed by all police forces, and the report also asked the government to come up with a plan within a year to make professional bodies and trade unions safe for Jewish members, and recommended an anti-Semitism training qualification to be introduced by employers, something probably well overdue.
Okay, so let's have the response from our Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, was as followed. We welcome the launch of the Board of Deputies Commission on Anti-Semitism, and will look closely at its recommendations as part of our work to keep communities safe. The government has been criticised by Jewish organisations within the Labour Party's performance as anti-Israel policies such as suspending trade talks and ongoing arms sales. We see that Labour Against Anti-Semitism, a campaign group that says its policies added to a climate of intolerance and hate towards British Jews. So there are big question marks whether this Labour government can actually deliver on the recommendations of the Lord Mann and Mordaunt report on Jew hatred. This is a kind of summing up with 2 minutes left. As Christians, we need to hate that sin of Jew hatred because it's satanic. We know from history where Jew hatred takes a society and a nation. It takes them to a place of total devastation and destruction. And wherever we see a political ideology that its heart is one of Jew hatred, then we know what follows is totalitarianism and evil. And that's why, for example, what starts with the Jewish people never finishes with the Jewish people. But also God loves the Jewish people, as we've read from the scriptures, and Israel. And if we love God, then we should love the things of God. And that is his covenant people, which is the Jewish people.
Absolutely. And, as Christians, we often say what starts with the Jewish people doesn't end with the Jewish people, but actually we stand with the Jewish people because of our love. I believe we have a familial connection from the Jewish people, the apostles, the gospel, the word, the prophets. Of course, Yeshua, some people say Jesus was Jewish. He is Jewish. He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root and offspring of David. What saddens me as a reverend in this country is our history of Christian Zionism, amazing people like William Heckler that led to the Balfour Declaration, Lord Salisbury, and then after, the end of 1948 up until today, and where we're heading to today when Jewish people are telling us that they are thinking of leaving this country, especially if this Islamophobia, blasphemy law comes in. That's what a lot of people are telling me. That is sad.
Tim, done a great job on Behind the Headlines. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching this at home. We cannot tolerate Jew hatred in our country. We can't tolerate it in our countries and on our churches. So it's time to speak up against this vile hatred that's irrational. So thank you for watching Behind the Headlines.